topics, turbos, because turbos are always awesome. What I want to talk about really is the video that I'm working on, which is going to be, I was going through lots of the comments, and a lot of the questions I get are, "Hey, Richard, what's your favorite, motor? What's your favorite car? Those kinds of things. What's the most amount of power that you've made, and what's the high?" People sometimes get detailed. What's the highest specific output motor you've done? So I thought about doing a video like that covered like the highest power numbers that I've done, and specific things like, okay, what thing made the highest specific horsepower per cubic inch or torque number? What thing had the best brake specific fuel consumption or BMEP or whatever? So I was thinking about doing that, but along the way, while I was researching that, I found a bunch more information on things that I think situations that I've created in this industry. And I noticed that from when I get feedback when I post stuff on Facebook or Instagram, excuse me, and also from the comments I get directly from the videos. But if you look through all of the videos that I've done and all the testing that I've done, you take a look and you see, well, hey, look, when a guy asks, well, hey, should I put 317 heads on there? Everybody jumps on, no, look at Richard's stuff. You need to use the 706 heads. And while that's kind of true, it's not an absolute the way that a lot of people have made it into. Same thing with long runner versus short runner intake manifolds and different kinds of camshafts and all kinds of stuff. And honestly, I don't want these things to be absolute. Like I don't want there to be people throwing stones at a guy that has 317 heads and he's going to put them on there. Quite honestly, they're going to work just fine, which we'll see in the video, because what happens is I'll show you a combination that I put together where we ran, for instance, 317 heads, which have, big chambers and they make less power than some of the other stuff because the compression's lower. But if you don't see it in comparison to something else that's better, all you're seeing is this is the NA power and this is the boosted power. You would just look at it like, hey, look, they put it together a combination and then they added boost to it, and magically it, made a lot more power, had a big gain. And the thing is, you could go up from there and make even more power. And I think an argument could be made, and this is a test that that's on the list of things I really love to do, but I need to do it with somebody that has the ability to actually accurately monitor. They need knock detection, basically. I need detonation thresholds for these kinds of things. But for instance, I want to check and see if the question is, one of the questions is, hey, what happens? I want to see a comparison between running, higher boost and less timing, and then less boost and higher timing. In my opinion, I think that if the detonation threshold is the yardstick, I think more boost wins that. I think you could get a better gain from having more boost and lower timing than you can from having more timing and less boost. It'd be interesting to see what that sweet spot is. And then detonation would be the thing. It would be the determining factor for all that. Now, would you do that on pump gas? Would you do that on race gas? That obviously would change things around a bit. But I think that would be an interesting test. But the other thing is, like, how much power can I run with that kind of combination given like on 91? So what they want to know is if, and this is a good instance where I think maybe the 317 head might be a better choice. And this is why I was saying that it's not when I do these tests and I say, hey, look, the 706 head made this much power, the 317 made this much power. And then when we added turbo to both of them, that thing kind of stayed the same. And there was still, in favor run at the same boost level because we had more power NA. We also have more power under boost. But as we know, with a turbo, you just add boost and then you've equalized that. But the question becomes then, if we only have 91 octane and we're trying to make power on 91 octane and we're, getting near the level of or the limit of detonation, can we do that better? Is there a bigger window? Can we ultimately make more power with that detonation threshold with a 317 head that has lower compression? Will that allow us to add the combination of boost and or timing, that combination of those two things, to make more power when we have the lower compression than it does with the 706 head? So I don't know the answer to that. I think we're getting into the point where we might be splitting hairs there, or hey, maybe it's just way one-sided. Maybe one of those chambers is, you know, we're not just changing static compression there. Maybe one of them is more detonation resistant than the other by design, not necessarily by, you know, its displacement. Basically, if you measure obviously the chamber volumes on them, one has a great deal more than the other. But irrespective of that, also the efficiency of the chamber, of its design, one of them may lend itself, you know, the same way that softening the chamber does, may lend itself more to you know, resistance against detonation, and therefore we could run the combination of timing and boost with the lower compression, and then it would all work out. That's the kind of testing I'd like to do. But to do that, we need knock detection to be able to do that. I need something telling me, hey, whoa, you're there, you're at the limit. I don't want to just guess on that limit, because then I'm not really testing anything. If I run them both at some safe amount and they both do that, and then whatever one makes more power, I determine, oh, this one makes more power. Yeah, but you never gave this other one a fair shot, because it still had 2 more pounds that it could run. And in that 2 pounds that was still safe because of the lower compression, it would have surpassed the other one. So I want it to be the combination dictating the results rather than me doing that. And to do that, again, we would need some sort of detonation sensing device to be able to tell me where that limit is, rather than me just picking some arbitrary point like we normally do on the engine dyno. So that's one of them. The other thing is, and I'm going to go over all of these in the video, obviously, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what tests you guys might like to see, because I was talking to Brian from Summit Racing today, who is, interestingly enough, I was talking to him on the phone, but his message from Facebook got hacked. And so somebody was asking me questions posing as him, but I asked questions back and obviously got to the bottom of it. So it was an interesting deal. But he was talking about the turbos that Summit is now selling, and then the ability, because they have different variations of those, to test different things. So we could test, I'm trying to look at combinations where I can test AR, and I can test a T4 versus a T6, and, you know, those kinds of things. So well, we're going to get into that. And I'm just going to ask you guys what you, oh, Casey, thank you very much. Todd will appreciate that. So we'll be able to talk about what those tests might be and what we might like to see, because there are some things that I want to try. I would love to try, like I did back with the Honda B16 engine that I did back with Steve or Powertrain Dynamics. Thank you again. Shout out to Steve and Nanette, where I tested a 48, a 63, and an 82 AR on this little T3 turbo on the B16. And because we were at or near the limit of the flow limit of the turbo, we saw some really big changes in that change in AR. I think the same thing would have to happen if we were testing turbos and testing the change in AR. I don't think that the engine dyno is an ideal place to test responses like that, and I've said that many times. I still think we could see a change like we saw with the Brian Tooley Truck Norris cam versus the Sloppy Stage 2 cam, where even on the engine dyno, we could see changes in torque output, basically down low, and then the corresponding changes in boost response. And we would see that not just with that particular cam. The Truck Norris cam is good for low speed power, but also with other things, long runner intake manifolds and static compression and displacement and all those things that would enhance low speed power. Those are also going to be able to improve the boost response. So I think we can still see that if we set the test up right, and we could see a change in AR. I did a T4 versus a T6 before, although I wasn't as strict on the test as I wanted to be. We didn't see a big change in power, but to be able to test it, you know, super accurately, I need to make sure that I go in and make sure that the temperatures are the same, and that that I go through the sequence of making sure that the turbo response rate is exactly the same, and like we did in the last test, where the turbo response is exactly the same, and that repeats, and then that becomes the dedicated deal before we make a change. Obviously, we have to put, the oil temperature and the air fuel and the timing and all that stuff have to be the same. So it's a little bit more difficult test. The other thing with the turbo stuff is we need to make sure that we have an electronic boost controller that tells us, hey, look, if you want to test at 10 pounds, this is always going to be 10 pounds. So we need to make sure that that would happen as well. So those could be some interesting tests. And I'm working on that and trying to figure out a way to get the right combination of stuff. Because the other thing that they have is they have T4, T6, and V-band available, which is beneficial for me because at least on the LS, the Y pipe and the big block is like that also too. The one that we did for the 8.1 ends in a 3-inch V-band. I need to look and see what size their V-band is. I might have to go to V-band reducer if theirs is only a 2.5. But that's pretty easy because right now I'm going from a 3-inch V-band to either a T6, like with that Summit S475, or a T4 or a T3. So I've never run a T3 on that, but maybe we will. It will be interesting to do that. I'm also excited about testing, and speaking of turbos, the Fowler exhaust manifolds that they sent, so I can run twins on it. I had ordered some 4-volt to V-band exhaust adapters for the max speeding turbos that I have. So I should be able to run both the 3076s and the 3582s that I have. So we should be able to test both of those. I want to run one of each of those anyway on the 3800, and then run 2 of those on the LS as twins with those exhaust manifolds. And they're tucked in nice. They're not the crazy stuff that I normally do. So we have that stuff coming up. Right now, the guys at Engine Masters are down there testing, and I've been on the phone with those guys. I think I might have messed up some of their testing, but let's see. Okay, so that's David talked to me about some tests that they're doing. So on the turbo stuff, what tests would you guys like to see? NOx sensors are fancy. Yeah, we don't ever run NOx sensors on any of these things. At least I don't. And I would like to, as long as I knew that what they were detecting was indeed NOx and not some of the other stuff that rattles around on these motors that kind of happens. 3200 billet Circle D converter, no issues. Cool. What else is going on with our turbo stuff? I wanted to talk about. I know the other thing I want to talk about was the video that I just put up is the big block Chevy stuff. We're up to 800 horsepower now, so it's 800 horsepower combinations. And the interesting thing is, and I don't think that we ran this. I looked through the data to find out. I could have sworn that we tried to run the 800 horsepower version also on 87 because we ran it just on pump gas 91, and it had no trouble doing that. Because again, just like with the 700 and something horsepower version, we ran, it was a 540. It was a Dart SHP. It was a flat top piston, so it had low compression. It was like 8.75 to 1. It had a big camshaft and even bigger than the one that we had run on the Blueprint motor. Maybe it was about the same. It was a 271 284 or something, if I remember right. Something like 271 280 on a 112. So again, low dynamic compression, low static compression, good chamber design. It was a aluminum. What were they? AFR heads on there? No, Dart 335 Pro 1. So again, a good set of heads. We ran a couple of different tunnel rams on them. So we ran the old school Wine, any of the big block guys, or even small block ones, because the small block one is a lot like the big block one. The Wine tunnel rams with 2, I think we ran 750s on it, and that worked well. It made 770 or something. And then when we put the big Dart tunnel ram on with 2 Dominators on it, then it made over 800. And then we did a Wilson ported version of that Dart one, which Westech still has, and ran that. And then it jumped up to 830, which was a really good, or 833 or something, which was a really good combination. Again, because it's such low compression. And the other thing is we gave no consideration at all to this like cam choice. it all worked out very well. I mean, that was good power. It made really good power given its compression. Imagine what it would be if it was 12 or 13 or 14 to 1. That's one of the things I mentioned in the video. But this camshaft was a 4-7 swap cam. And I know that a lot of guys want the 4-7 swap to be responsible for all the power, but it's not. It was a 4-7 swap cam, and only because when we went up to where Westech has a few cams sitting up there, we found a big block cam and we needed something that was going to be, 270 or above, because we wanted to put a real camshaft in. At the time when I was first doing this and we chose this camshaft, we were going from a mild combination to a wild combination. So we had a mild combination put together with that motor. So we had as cast, I think, trick flow heads. We had a small extreme energy camshaft in it. We had a single plane intake and a single carburetor, and ran that, I think, as the mild combination. And then we wanted to step up, quite a bit. So we put the Dart Pro 1 heads on it. We put this camshaft that we found that Westech had, it was readily available, put that camshaft in, and then put a Super Victor on with the Dominator as a single carburetor, but then also ran it with all of these tunnel rams. And the tunnel rams were better than the single plane were. And obviously the Wilson ported Dart tunnel ram did very well. I mean, it made 833. So that was pretty big power from such low compression. I was really happy with that combination. But then the other 800 horsepower combinations, a 496 Pro Max head. So they did CNC heads. They did well. It had that BR300 cam, the 255, 262 cam, fairly mild for a solid roller. It was only 650 lift. We ran that camshaft in those heads. It was a small dome piston like I normally put in them, and a single plane intake manifold. And then we just, I put because we were trying to make some power, so we put a Dominator style carburetor, a 4500 flange intake manifold, and then a 1050 Dominator on there. And then we just ran a plate nitrous on it. And then we hit it with a 62 jet. And when everything was right, it made like 850 or 860. So, jumping into the 800 horsepower, not a problem at all. Curve was like perfectly smooth. Airfield was great. It all worked out nice. And then the final one was even more of a disparity between the starting point and the ending point, because we ran this was something I think I did for Stephen Rupp back in the day, and it was a ZZ 454 crate motor. I think we changed the cam in it. We put a 230, 236 cam in it from Comp. Unless it already had that. I'm not that familiar with the ZZ. I can't remember the ZZ 454. I don't think it had that much camshaft in it. I think we put that camshaft in it, and then we just ran a Pro Charger on it. So it made 5 like low to mid 500s NA, and then made, it was a 236, 242, 521, 540 on a 110, and then put the Pro Charger on there. And we ran a couple of different Pro Chargers when we were doing the testing. We ran a P1X and a D1X. And then I put the radius entry on there. And this thing was only showing at the power peak where we fairly easily exceeded 800 horsepower, 810 or 15 or something. It was only 7.8 pounds. So it started out at 2.4 pounds on the load in down near 3,000. And this was only out at 6,000 RPM, and revved it all the way out to 6,000 RPM and 7.8 pounds. I ran it on 91 and 100 mix, but I think honestly, given the static compression ratio of that motor and the boost that we also ran an intercooler, that this thing could have run on pump gas too. I just didn't want to take a chance. It was somebody else's motor. I just wanted to get the test done and so that they could do what they needed to do with the motor wherever it was going in. So it was good stuff. So I need to do a poll for tonight. So the poll will be, can you make big turbo power, turbo LS power with, can you make, let's see, how about to be more specific? Can you make See, I'm trying to get to 100% on one side, and we'll see. I know somebody's going to mess it up for me. Can you make 1,000 horsepower with 317 LS heads? So simple. And a turbo. So in honor of our thumbnail and the video that I'm working on, we're going to take a look and see what's going on with the 317 heads, because what's happened, and this has been going on a lot of years. I mean, this goes back a number of years when I did the test comparing the 241, the 317, the 799/243, and then the 706/816 or 862 heads. If you look at those results, and then I also, the 317 was always the one that we beat up on. So I compared the 317s to the 799s. I compared the 317s to the 823s. I compared them to the 706s. I did a bunch of testing where the 317 was essentially the low man on the totem pole. And I think that people now, at least people who have paid attention to all the testing and aren't just like totally new to this, I think that they see that as the case. I think that everyone shuns the 317 head. And quite honestly, I don't think you should. When I make a point, and we talk about this many, many times, when I make a point that you can make the power that you want to make with a cam and springs on any LS, and that you don't have to change the head, that includes the 317 head. Uh-oh, attack dogs. They're attacking the 317 heads on a 6-liter, because that's what it came with. And quite honestly, they flow well enough. I know that they have a big chamber and the compression's low. It's less low on a 6-liter than it would be if you were to take those 317s and put them on a 5.3 or 4.8. Now, if somebody asked me, hey, Richard, should I take the 706 heads off of my 5.3 or my 4.8 and put 317 heads on and swap them, I would tell them no. But I would tell them no for more than just the reason that I think that the 317 would be essentially a step down in power. Also, because I would tell them you shouldn't swap. I would tell them the same thing if they were asking me if they should swap to 799 heads on a 4.8 or 5.3 from their 706 heads or their 862 heads. I'd tell them the same thing. No, you don't need to do that. You can do everything that you need to do with what you have. So the same thing applies to the 6-liter. So in the video that I'm doing, that will be the discussion. The discussion isn't that, oh, the 317 heads are the worst heads ever made and you should never run them. I don't believe that. And like I said, not only would I tell them not to disregard them or throw them away if they had them on their 6-liter, I would also tell them, and I don't know the answer to this yet, that if they were to run them on another combination and they're trying to do it on 91, it might be a better choice. I'm not sure. I wish I had more data, but the thing that I don't like to do is I don't like to speculate. So I could give them my opinion that I think that the 317 head might be a better choice there. And the only reason I hesitate on that is because, again, I like the lower compression, but I don't know which chamber design is more susceptible to detonation, irrespective of the change in compression ratio. I don't know that. I don't have an answer to that, and I would really like to have one. But again, we would need detonation detection to be able to say, hey, look, that chamber is not good. I know firsthand, at least, well, secondhand, I guess, from Brian Tooley telling me how when he was at either TEA or TrickFlow, that they did a test with 799 or 243 heads and a 317 head, because they flowed a similar amount, and they even milled the 317 heads to get the chamber size down, and they still made less power than the 243 and 799s. And if you look at the chamber design is definitely different. I mean, just dramatically different. You can see that. So his contention is that the 243 and 799 castings have not just a smaller chamber, but a better chamber, and that it makes more power. But therein lies the question again, because it makes more power, just because it makes more power, is it also less susceptible to detonation? I don't have an answer to that, and I kind of wish that I did. Tyler, you're bringing ice cream cake? Dude, I'm all in on ice cream cake, as long as it's pralines and cream. Let's see. All heads are turbo heads? Yes, they are. I mean, look at what we've done with 5-liter heads. I mean, any sort of 5-liter head wishes it was the worst LS head, obviously. I bet the cast iron 6 head can easily make 1,000 horsepower. Obviously the answer is, and to give away our poll, that if the cast iron head is a 317 head, it's just an iron version. I'm told that the casting is the same. I haven't digitized them to determine that that's the case. But it's the same head, and if it flows the same, it makes enough power to support that. Can we shoot for 1,000 horsepower 5.3 naturally aspirated? Is that even possible? It's not. I'm not able to do that. I don't have the I don't have the wherewithal. I don't have the knowledge, the talent, or the money to be able to do that, because that would be really expensive. So that'd be almost 200 horsepower per liter. That's a lot. There are motors making that kind of power. There are motors making a lot more than that, but it would take an awful lot to get there. You can make 2,000 horsepower with 317 heads, and that's probably true. What displacement? And Alex wants to know what displacement on the LS on the question. I guess on the poll, it doesn't matter. Honestly, you could put 317s on a 4.8, and as long as the thing that was blowing in there would support that, it would be fine. Braden, I honestly think that if you did an intake manifold for that your 450X, if it just has a carburetor attached to the head, that you could pick up power somewhere in the curve. Now, I don't know what the RPM range is, and Honda's pretty good about sciencing that stuff out for that length, but you could, I would almost guarantee that you could pick up power somewhere. You might trade it for somewhere else, but that's usually what happens. Do it with the iron head. Now, see, I had a set of those iron heads. I haven't seen them for a while. They came off of Chad's motor, and that's the motor that we did the original Gen 3 Big Bang 6-liter with that made 1482. We replaced those with a good set of ported aluminum heads, but I don't remember what happened to those iron heads. Great Dane Chihuahua mix. So somebody's putting some work in there. Speaking of heads, the Jegs LS3 heads flow 285 and 184 out of the box. That's not very much in comparison to a stock set of LS3 heads. That's quite a bit down. Dan, I see everything. We did a little deal last night to try to take care of Todd. So we're gonna hook him up with some stuff so he can get his project done. Casey, can you program an idle miss on a Holley computer to give the motor some chop? Yeah, you should be able to tune in some chop. Isn't that what the Ghost Tune is doing? Although I think that they're altering the cam timing to do that. But yeah, you should be able to cut cylinders out, I think. Can an NA Corvair motor get to 400? It would be struggling to get it with boost, I think. Richard, do you think an at-home port and polish is worth it on 862 heads on a turbo 5.3? I wouldn't do it on a turbo motor. I wouldn't recommend it at all. If you have them things apart and you want to clean them up, I can understand that. But you don't need to do it with a turbo thing unless you're trying to make a lot of turbo power. And by a lot, I mean like 1,500 or 2,000. If this is a 700 or 800 horsepower deal or anything less than 1,000, you should just make sure that the heads are sealed and stuff and put them on. So, Dan, you're going to send that and gourmet food? Going to run the 8720 Summit Cam or the Turbo Cam. We did raise money last night for one of the viewers. He has cancer and he's building a project, and I want to try to get him taken care of a little bit. Are you ever going to do a small block Chevy versus a 5.3? Like, which small block Chevy do you want to see? There's no factory small block Chevy that makes as much as a stock 5.3 does. Well, one of the, like an LT1, an old LT1, and even a Gen 2 LT1 might make as much as a truck 5.3, like an LM7, but not as much as any of the other ones. What fuel did you run on the 4.8 with a sloppy stage 2 cam, if you remember? You mean when I did the sloppy stage 2 versus the world test? If that's the one you're talking about, we ran all of them on 91. Richard, have you ever tested a 1980s LS9 350? I'm asking because the peak torque of 275 at 1600. How could GM get a peak torque so low? It's not a diesel, it's a gas. I think that might be a misprint. I would be very surprised if there was a torque peak at 1600 RPM. No, Racer D, I did not look at that. I do need to look at the Iron Duke stuff. I'll write myself a note. As soon as I get off, I'm like immediately on to other stuff. Iron Duke test. So I do want to look at that. Yes, 200 people in here. Get the like button. We're at 91 likes and 211 people. Wow. I'm. Is it me? So can you make 1,000 horsepower with a 317 LS head and a turbo? We still have 6% saying no. So we're at 94%. So that's like almost 100. John, the big question is, would be able to make 1,000 horsepower stock 241 heads? Yes, the 241 head made more power than the 317 head did. It flows a little less, but it made more power because of the chamber. Have you done a comparison of a 5.3 turbo and an NA big block and tried to match the torque curve? I think that video is up already, Michael. I don't remember if it was a 5.3 or a 4.8, but it was one of those. And yeah, we could get the curve pretty consistent. It wouldn't be the same all the way down where the 4.8 was out of boost unless we size the turbo to only do some reasonable kind of power level. But at some point, it's not going to be in boost, and the big block obviously is going to do better. Just curious, I'll be happy with 750 to 800, Force 406. Yep. How big can I go on a cam for a 5.3 before you need to upgrade the valve springs? The valve spring you're going to need for two reasons. One is going to be lift. So the valve spring in a 5.3 is the smallest valve spring that GM offered. And you could go up to a stock LS3 valve spring. You could put more camshaft in it. But most people put some kind of beehive or a dual spring in there for two reasons. Well, multiple reasons. Is if you're doing a turbo on it, the boost is going to need more valve spring. RPM is going to need more valve spring. The cam lift is going to need more valve spring. And then if you're going up in duration, it's going to have RPM. So the RPM then comes back and you're going to need more valve spring. You brought up in your Junkyard 5.7 Vortec motor at the end of the video. You asked if we should do a test with it against. Oh, so you want to do a Vortec 5.7 versus a 5.3? I contacted Mark at Vortec Pro, and we're going to be doing something together with peanut port heads. So that will be fun. So after talking to him, he's obviously the real deal. Have you seen the head-to-head builds LT has been building on his two Chevy trucks? Yeah, I have seen that. The Turbo 8.1 and the Turbo 4.8. Hit that like button. Justin's got to head to work. Any opinions on Summit Racing Pro LS turbo camshaft lineups? I've tested a few of the Pro LS cams, and every one I've tested has worked well. Do you need a wastegate if you're going to use all the boost? No, just cap it. Have you ever tested the BTR shaft rocker system? What's your opinion on it? I've never run it on anything because I think a shaft rocker would be most beneficial for fairly high RPM stuff. Have you ever tested LS hydraulic lifters versus solid ones? Frank, in my opinion, in the stuff that I'm doing, there's no reason for me to ever put a solid lifter in anything because I don't run enough engine speed to take advantage of that. When turboing an all aluminum engine, is there anything weird that happens as opposed to how a cast iron block? There is, especially on aftermarket aluminum blocks. Factory ones seem to have the growth thing kind of taken care of, but on a lot of aftermarket aluminum blocks, there are things that you have to take into consideration. What's your opinion on 6-liter LQ4 pistons, 823 heads, and a Norris cam? That's going to work fine. Take a look at all of I have videos up of a 6-liter LY6 with 823 heads. And I didn't run the Norris cam because it wasn't out at the time, but I ran all of the truck cams. So that will give you a fair idea on what's going on, but it works fine. Richard, do you like beehives more than dual springs? I like dual springs better only because if you break one spring, you still have another one. If you break a beehive spring, you're going to hit the valve. So I like that better. But that being said, I run the 26918 or pack stuff. I run beehive springs all the time on LS stuff. Some of the diesel trucks I worked on years ago didn't have wastegates. The Jeep 4-liter factory combustion chamber is wider than the cylinder bore. That's actually not uncommon. That's very common even on big buck Chevys. With chamfering the top portion of the cylinder bore be worth the effort? It is, and that's pretty common. If you look at a factory 396, it has notches for the valves. I don't know if it might. I don't know if it has one for the exhaust. I think it might. I know it has one for the intake, and that's actually one of the things that we're going to do, and that Mark did when he did the porting on the peanut port heads, he also put a 219 188 valve package in it, which is fairly kind of standard for big block Chevys. But the bore, or the inside diameter basically of the chamber, is bigger than the bore size is, which is one of the reasons I think when he did his, he went 100 over on his block to help airflow, and obviously to help unshroud the valve too. But the other way is you put a little notch in the top of the, it doesn't need to be all the way around, just a notch where the valve is going to be. If your question about the aluminum blocks is factory stuff, I wouldn't hesitate to run a 5.3 aluminum block for power and obviously weight. How about doing some E15 testing? I don't think we have E15 at the local gas station. Yeah, the L33 is good. The LC9, all of those are good. Yeah, Dan, that it's no guarantee that you won't hurt it, but at least you have some margin of safety. 396 is only notch for the intake valve. I thought it was only one of them. What type, material, size, drive shaft? Does anybody have any drive shaft information? I've run on our World Challenge cars, we ran aluminum and carbon fiber drive shafts, but I don't know about the off-road stuff if that's what you're doing. Big Billy Racing, or any advice to picking a cam on a fresh build, looking to make 450 wheel horsepower NA? I'm hoping it's a 6-liter then. Lots of 6-liter cam choices up there. It depends on what you're. I need more information. You need to tell me what the rest of the combination is and what you're trying to do with it. And is it going to be a driver? Is that a concern? Yeah, I like Mark. It seems like a good guy at Vortec Pro, and I like the fact that he took that motor and built it, and then put it in the car and went out and ran tens with it. That's with peanut port heads. That's impressive. It's cool that it did what it did on the dyno, which is one thing, but then to actually go out and show that it does what it does, and he did it with a dual plane intake and stock rockers, which was pretty impressive. Richard, have you tried TurboSmart, the electronic wastegates? I have not. And do you know of a standalone controller for one? I don't. I'm waiting for Marty to get back. I think he's traveling right now, but as soon as he gets back, I'm going to talk to him about some TurboSmart stuff. I ended up with a 5.3 motor that needed to be bored out. I have a 5.7 LS1 piston. That's a combination where we're good. How to decide between a big block and an LS for 72? It's just the one that speaks to you. Both of them can make power. The big block is going to have more torque than the LS does. So if that's your thing and you want to have a big block and spin the tires, then that's the way to go. Edward, so you want to see a journal bearing versus a ball bearing setup? That's a pretty common question. How much horsepower is safe for a stock bottom end Gen 6 454 NA? You couldn't put enough power into that NA 454 to hurt the bottom end. We've done 12 or 1300 so far with boost. So unless you're going to run a million RPM or whatever, you're fine for whatever you're going to put into it. Cameron, so you want to figure out that would be a neat trick. I would love it. I would be all in on it. You need to figure out a way to increase valve spring pressure and increase ring gap with a laptop. That would be a neat program if you could write that. Richard, have you ever run a VS S480 on a stock 5.3? I have not. I have run an S480 from a Borg Warner one, but it was a T4, so it wasn't what they normally are. Street Rat Garage, have you tested Matt Happel's cam? Yeah, I have. That video is up already. We did a comparison. Can I email you engine information? Big Bill, yeah, you can. I mean, if you just told me real quickly, is it a street car? Is it a drag race car? Is it a truck? Is it a car? Does it have a converter if it's an automatic? That kind of stuff. Because if I tell you should put a Truck Norris cam in it and you go, well, I would really like to make a lot more power on the big end. Well, okay, well, then you put a 231 cam in it. Does it have valve reliefs? How much can I work with here? Jeff, what do people care about now that they didn't care about before? What about a different scenario? How about boost and low octane, say 87 on a turbo LS, say 4.8 with a GT45 and turbo minded cam? I don't know. You just have to keep stripping timing out of it to run on that octane. How strong is a stock LM7 crankshaft? So far 1,542 horsepower and 1,300 foot-pounds because it's the same crank as the 6-liter. So start using the pipeline again. Going back to Plus Fuels. You are you talking about the, what is that, the Keystone one or something? You know, there's 3 of those already, right? They're working and running and bringing stuff down from Canada. That's just the 4th one. Our farm up north will have to grow corn. I thought somebody's talking about switchgrass. So you're required to grow corn? Richard, have you tested a small block Chevy Ramjet? I haven't. I was trying to think back and see if I remembered somebody bringing one into Westech, that they may have had one, because the editors get all of the like fancy stuff. And so I don't know if they may have brought one in, or if the guys at Westech may have done one. Oh man. Richard, I'm currently assembling an L92 with BTR Stage 2 master kit. Do you have an estimated power so I know where to go next? I don't know what that is. I'm not familiar with all of the offerings from that Brian has over there. What do we have to do to see the big block Big Bang? I don't know. I need to prep the thing so that it's running right. How about trying a test on a Ramjet? That's nice, except I don't have one. So I can't test the stuff that I don't have. What cheap turbo company have you seen good results from? All of the turbos that I've tried, of all the turbos I've ever tried, from CX Racing or VS or DNA or anything that I bought from eBay, I've never had a turbo fail. I have had one from one company, and that was Comp Turbo, and it was way back. And we put it on and started it up, and we're getting ready to load in it, and we could see the wheel because the wheel's right in front of us when we're, I mean, it's behind the bulletproof glass or whatever, but we can see it in the dyno, and the turbo just stopped. And I'm like, it's not supposed to do that. The motor's running. That should still be spinning, but it locked up. That's the only time I've ever seen one go bad. Otherwise, all like the CX Racing stuff they did with the Big Bang back in 2010, all those turbos are still alive. What are your thoughts on pack valve springs, and do you have experience with them? I don't know if I've ever run a pack spring. I think I've gotten kits that may have had them in there, but I've never ordered anything that I remember directly from them. I think that Matt over at Sloppy uses that stuff a lot, and Pack makes a lot of different springs for a lot, and does private label stuff for a lot of different people. So I'm sure that some of the stuff that I've run has been that. Can you do anti-lag spool tests with the compressed air Volvo style? Anti-lag spool test with compressed air? You're gonna have to explain that to me, and I don't know that we would be able to do anti-lag on the engine dyno. I don't know. You'd have to, Turbo Boy, you'd have to ask Byron what the difference between the VS Racing 7875, the Gen 2 and the Gen 3. I don't know. I have a Gen 2 and it works very well. I don't know what the changeover was to the Gen 3. Is a sloppy stage 2 cam a good cam to use in the LM7? It's not, in my opinion, unless you're drag racing. And it sounds kind of like, yeah, that cam's going to work for that application. You have an S400, a 69 Camaro, a Glide, a 4500 stall, 411 gears, and yeah, that should work fine. Richard, do you think twin eBay 7875s are too much on a 6-liter, obviously with cam springs, gap ties? No, if you're, I mean, I think you're the kind of guy that's going to run way into the 4-digit stuff, right? So that those will definitely do that. And when I say way into the 4-digit stuff, like mid 4-digit stuff. Currently building my first turbo V8. We're all very proud of you. When are you going to bring back the other guys? 292. I need to. Richard, you don't see any difference between a $250 turbo and a $2,500 turbo with the same flow numbers? I don't know what you mean by flow numbers. More than likely, a $250 turbo, if you're talking about a compressor map, has no compressor map, so we don't know what that is. Obviously, flowing them on a flow bench does nothing. So you'd be comparing specs, maybe, inducer and exducer size on both the hot side and the cold side, and then ARs on both of those. And you could maybe kind of get an idea. What I would be interested in is, are those turbos, what are they sized for? Because a good example is that I did a test with 76 millimeter turbos, one of them from CX Racing, and one of them was a Precision, an actual 76 millimeter turbo. And the difference was 500 horsepower between them. So it was a lot. But they both weren't really 76 millimeter turbos. The CX Racing guys just called it that because that was the most popular size turbo. And for the algorithm, the Google Analytics, they knew that people would go to it and they would buy it. But that's not really a comparison between two of the same size turbos. So if you have two of the same size turbos and one of them is a lot more money, I would like to see what it brings. Maybe it just brings longevity. Maybe it brings other things. But if I run an expensive turbo and an inexpensive turbo, and I run them both at 10 or 15 pounds of boost, and they both make the same power, then I would say that they're the same. Again, unless one of them breaks right after that. But I haven't had that happen yet. Should I go with 9.5 to 1 on my 408 turbo on 91 octane 317 heads, or lower or higher? Is it better to go with higher with less boost, or lower? We just covered that earlier. I would think lower would be better for 91 octane because it gives you a bigger safety margin for tuning. Would you do a test with different weight flywheels? I have already, and it does change the power. I had a turbo go bad in my 2.2 Daytona. The bushings wore out to the point that the impellers contacted the housing. Was it a stock one or was it some aftermarket one? Are you using new oil in your engines, or do you recycle it? I put new oil in the engines from the ones that we get from the wrecking yard. They get new oil, not anything special usually. Can you run a 4-cylinder engine too lean with a big turbo? Yes. At part throttle, steady state cruise at 3,500, might need bigger injectors. It's moving some air even out of boost. You need to have the right air fuel, the correct air fuel for all driving situations. And if you just it doesn't matter how many cylinders it has, 1 cylinder or 2 or 10 or 15 or 20, whatever it is, you need to have the right air fuel under the driving conditions. If you're driving and cruising down the road and you're making a half a pound of boost, you need to have the right amount of air fuel for that. If you're making 3 inches of vacuum or 10 inches of vacuum, whatever you're doing, you have to have the right amount of air fuel. And just putting a turbo on and not addressing the tune or the injector size or the pump is not a good idea. Richard, have you ever run across an early 2000 Chevy Thunder truck? No, I haven't heard of that. Managed to find a Ford V10 at the wrecking yard. Good. I'm going to clean it up and check it out. Would you run it on the dyno? I know people would like to see it. I do want to see it. It is on my list of motors I would like to try. Travis, I'm not convinced that longevity is the thing. His comment was, I hear people mention longevity on expensive turbos versus cheap turbos, but nobody ever tells me what exactly wears out. The wearable items wear out in it, so the bearings and the seals, or the shaft, depending on how bad it gets. But the thing is, that might not be the case. That might not be actually happening. I don't know somebody who's taken turbos and run them for 10 years and find it, and both of them equally in the same amount of loads and temperature changes and all that, to show that one actually is better or worse than the other. Here's one thing I do know, that I wouldn't ever spend $2,500 or $3,000 or whatever a really big expensive turbo costs, unless it gave me something that I had to have to win whatever class I was in. So if it was worth 5 more horsepower and I had to have that to win the race, I would. For a street car, I'm going to put a cheap turbo on it because the engine's also cheap that I have. It's going to be a wrecking yard engine. And so I'm not going to combine a $300 engine with a $3,000 turbo. I'm going to combine a $300 engine with a $300 turbo. And then if that $300 turbo goes bad, I'm just going to get another one down the road. And if you take care of it, it's probably not going to happen. Are you going to do any Ford 460 content? I am going to. Rotella T6 was my go-to until it disappeared. In all of your testing, what would you say is the best overall intake series for carbureted engines, as in both torque and horsepower gain across all rev ranges? There isn't an absolute. In one thing you'll find if you're here for very long is there's never an absolute statement like that. Absolute statements are nonsense. See what I did there? The intake manifold is primarily RPM based. So you design the intake manifold in an EFI version. It's a runner length thing, primarily a long runner and short runner kind of thing. Single plane, dual plane for the carbureted stuff. A dual plane has good average power production in a given range, and the single plane has good average power production in a different range. And so whatever the other things are with the engine and your intent for that engine, if you're going to be out running at the drag strip, more RPM usually makes the thing go faster and quicker. And so that might be a better choice for driving around town, the response and the drivability and all that stuff. The other one, so you got to pick the intake manifold for what you want to make it do. Dan, in defense of high dollar turbos, they do have lighter turbine shafts and spool up faster. I want to see some data on that. Volvo anti-lag injects compressed air via solenoid into the exhaust between the head and the turbo via a small tank filled with a small electric compressor. So is that did they do that for gas engines, or is that for diesel stuff? Are there benefits to a blow-through carb setup? Yeah, there definitely are benefits to a blow-through carburetor as opposed to a draw-through. Having fuel go through the turbo is not always a good idea. And it's even worse of an idea if you're going to do it and have it go through an intercooler. Do I think an S480 is too big for a mostly stock 5.3? I do. An S480 is like a 1200 plus horsepower turbo. Unless you're not planning on making that much, there are much better choices for, especially if it's a 5.3 and you have a stock cam. I would pick a GT45 for that. Tunnel ram beats all generalized statement. Yep. Except it doesn't beat a dual plane down low. Take care of your turbos. Let it idle a few minutes after shutting it off. Mike, in defense of turbos. Tyler McIntyre, you might want to make sure it's getting oil and let it run for a few before shutting off. Has anyone tried the eBay $280 billet 7875 XY turbo? I haven't seen that particular one, but it's $280. I mean, you should just try it and see. One thing I do make sure that I do on all these turbos when they're new is before we put them on and start it up and stuff, I always put oil. We have our little, Wizard of Oz Tin Man oil can that we squirt a bunch of oil in there until it comes out the drain. And then I'll spin the wheel a bunch and get everything like oiled up, pre-oiled before we hook everything up and then start it. Because I don't like to start them dry, just like with an oil pump and stuff. And I think that that's why all of these turbos have worked so well because of my preparation. Moto IQ swears by WPC treatment that it would create more power and less stress. I haven't seen oil added, like the snake oil additive treatments, just like I haven't seen power from spark plug design and stuff. I just haven't seen that. Richard, can I just bolt an eBay turbo on a customer's 91 MR2? His stock turbo let it? Was it a turbo MR2? Eric, Richard, I'm swapping an LS2 in 2 more minutes. I'm swapping LS2 into a BMW Z3 Coupe. I'm running into clearance issues with the engine 7/8 long tubes. Will I see a huge power loss if I smash them? No, you won't. They'll be fine. What is somebody coming in? Why are you coming in, Pontiac? Why are you always coming in with all caps? Any thoughts on competition, CAME, evolution, style, LA roller lifters? I don't know what they are, so I guess I don't have an opinion on them. Hans Metzger had a white paper years ago on injecting smog pump air into the exhaust to reduce turbo lag. Can I run E85 in regular gas in a carbureted engine? Not very successfully, depending on where your mixture is right now. If it's really rich and you put a little bit of E85 in it, that could help lean it out. Okay, WPC isn't an oil additive. It's micro shot peening of wear surfaces. So it's something that you do with the parts out of the car or out of the motor and then put it in. Well, you test a Buick 349. I don't have one of those. Is there anything you want to test on a chassis dyno that you can't test on your engine dyno? The Westech has a chassis dyno. They have 2 engine dynos and a chassis dyno. So if there's something that I wanted to test, I could. The problem is I don't have. It's a lot easier to have a whole bunch of different engines, but it's a whole nother thing to have a whole bunch of different kinds of vehicles to test them in. So that's a different deal. I think, like we were talking about, that boost response would be much better tested on a chassis dyno or even out on the street than it would be on the engine dyno. Yeah, Cameron, I don't see any reason, as long as it fits and bolts on, you can put a different turbo there. I built an 11-to-1 85 5.7. Is it a 5.7 LS or a small block Chevy or a or what else could it be? Could it be a Toyota maybe, or no? I think the Nissan's a 5.6, right? BTR Stage 2 Turbo Cam, so definitely LS with the BorgWarner S475. I'm guessing with a 132 AR that it's a T6. True twin scroll. Is it a? Do you have it divided? Are you feeding it divided so it's a true twin scroll setup? All of that. All you needed to tell me was the S475. That's about 1,000 horsepower turbo. So that's what you could make with that setup, because the turbo is going to ultimately dictate how much power that thing can make. Ford actually did a tank in their WRC rally car to store boost. I remember Travis, were you the guy that told me about that? I haven't read about that. It's kind of interesting if you want to look at it. There's a few good YouTube videos. Yeah, we're do you like people spamming or just meaningful commenting once or twice a stream? If somebody asks a question like that, they're obviously here looking for trouble. If you want to come here and be part of the community and learn, or also bring stuff to the table, even better. That's great. I don't know why anybody would ask somebody else to come and spam their community. That seems like it's not a good idea. My dad and I are building a twin turbo all aluminum setup. I'm worried about the stock bottom end. What motor is it? You got to tell me what motor it is, and then I can tell you. If it's a 5.3 aluminum 5.3, you don't have to worry about the power output. I mean, those things will go to 1,500, so you can do that. Would you keep an L33 for NA or trust it for boost? Well, 500 horsepower would be really easy on an L33. In fact, you could double that pretty easily with a cam and springs and ring gap. Oh yeah, we have to close out the poll. See, I finally got close to my 100%. All I have to do is phrase the question properly. Can you make 1,000 horsepower with a 317 LS heads and a turbo? The answer is yes, you can fairly easily. So for whoever the 5% were that said no, you should be here and listening to all of this because there's lots of good information. But yes, you can. With any LS factory head, you can do that. The poll's accurate, plus or minus 5%. Nitrous is the best anti-lag system. It does help a lot. Have you done much with centrifugal superchargers? Yes, lots and lots and lots and lots. They seem a lot less complicated. Take a look at all of the videos that I have up on centrifugal superchargers, and even comparisons between centrifugals and turbos and roots blowers and twin screws and stuff. All of that stuff that is there up on the channel. I tested them all on B series Honda, tested them all on a modular Ford, all on a small block Ford, and they always do the same thing. How much power do you think you'd gain running a cast iron block over an aluminum block? I'll bet if you tested them back to back and ran an L33 block and then took all of that stuff out and put it in an LM7 block, I would be surprised if you saw anything at all. These two hands. Thank you for supplying the information. I'm going to look in the WPC treatment. The problem with that is that it's like the cryogenic stuff also, that taking a motor apart, like taking the rods out, taking the pistons out, whatever, and having that done and then put it back in, it's not going to show any power gain. If it's a longevity thing, like shot peening does, so it adds strength, we won't be able to tell that. We won't be able to demonstrate that in any way. The only kinds of things like a thermal coating or a friction coating, and an anti-friction coating, scuffing on the pistons or those kinds of things. And to be able to do that is very, very difficult. It's a very difficult thing to test. That's why I haven't run those kinds of things. Do you plan on testing the Toyota Yuzi V8? I would like to test the V8 Toyota and the Nissan versions, but it just is a lot of rigmarole to get that to work. Okay, one more, one more minute. Richard, I met you at the Hotel Ely, Nevada in 1990. Wow, that was really early on before the open road race. I remember quoting a letter you wrote to Hot Rod. It's the gavel for the fastest judge or something like that. Oh yeah, I do remember that. That's very cool that you were out there then. That was way back. Is it worth port and polish the 823 heads? I already have oversized the intake valve. Why would you oversize the intake valve in an 823 head? It already has a gigantic valve in it already. And you can make them flow better, but they already flow enough to support. Well, we've made, I don't know, getting up near 700 horsepower with stock ones, 680 or 690, and they'll easily do 600 and or more with stock ones. According to Moto IQ, they told me different. They told you different about the ability to test that back to back. Most people don't think about it, but check how much torque it takes to turn the engine over. I do that a lot when I'm assembling a brand new engine. More so, I like to assemble it. I like to do that after we install each piston, because I like to make sure that it spins over freely and that I haven't snagged anything. And then you should be able to tell if you've done a lot of them, how much of a change you get from each one. And then also what it was from where you started with just the crank, which the crank should just spin freely basically. And then when you put all the pistons in, how much it takes to turn it over, it gets a pretty good idea for like ring drag. Wow, Dan, almost like I just said ring drag, right? See, half the time. Do you know exactly what your knock sensor problem is? Is that for me? V-band hot side flange makes it easier to line everything up. Yeah, it is. I like it because it helps me with, if that was directed to me or not, you're not talking to somebody else. For me, putting the turbo on there with a V-band on there allows me to rotate it, and then I can make the exhaust miss things that I need the exhaust to miss. And I can also make the discharge side fit for the various configuration of tubing and intercooler and stuff that I have. So it helps out a lot. Moto IQ I like the guys at Moto IQ. I did a coating and surface finish test. I would like to see that because I know how difficult that kind of test is. You should get the notchback ready for another silver shade. I should. I need to get it. Need to at least put a motor in and get it running. Knock sensors don't like solid cams. They don't like solid motor mounts. They don't. They don't like chattery engine dynos like drive plates, and they don't like a lot of things. You have to understand that using the bigger valve decreases the shrouding on some heads. I'd like to see that. Yeah, Racer D, that's always the balance between low tension rings and sealing, right? That's why we have gas ported pistons and vacuum pumps and stuff. Travis, have you ever measured the? This hurts my feelings that people are not watching the videos that I have up. Have you ever measured the power loss between running super stiff dual valve springs and single beehive springs? If you look up on the channel, there is a valve spring test on LS running the stock springs, a beehive springs, and a set of dual springs, and there is a power change. Have you ever tried, and this will be the last one for tonight because I got to get going. Have you ever tried water methanol injection in each of the intake runners rather than in the plenum? I have not. And that's what we discussed when I did the test with Freiberger, is that it needed to do that. We needed to have port injection so that at least the distribution would be even in all of them. I don't know. So the charge cooling should be even in all of them that way, but I still don't know if we're going to see a power change. I guess I meant power spool characteristics between T4 and a V-band. I don't know what I've never tried a V-band turbo. Only my V-band to whatever whatever configuration. I've never tried a turbo that has a V-band designed into its hot side. So I don't know if that would be better. I don't know if the taper helps the other one, or if having it small to start off, and I've never compared the openings on them back to back, looking at two of them together to see what the change is. It would be interesting to see somewhere. Somebody has to have some information on what those things do and how they change it, going from a V band to a T3 or a T4 or a T6 probably would be maybe more normal. Okay, guys, that's that's enough for me. I've got to get going. Obviously, I've been here. I'm already late. Thank you guys all for showing up, and hopefully you guys have checked out the Big Buck Chevy deal. I'm going to do some LS stuff coming up, and hopefully be headed down to West Tech, because right now they're filming Engine Master, so I can't be down there doing any testing right now. Anyways, thanks again. I will see you all tomorrow.